Imagine standing behind a strip of yellow police tape. The street is almost silent. A detective kneels beside a discarded glove. Another slowly photographs a broken fence. An evidence technician carefully brushes dirt away from a single shoe print. Around you, people whisper. A television camera records from across the road. Neighbors stand on their porches. Nobody notices you. You don't wear a badge. You aren't carrying a camera. You don't know the victim. You're simply another face in the crowd, exactly where you wanted to be. Then, a detective starts walking toward you, one step. Another, your heartbeat becomes deafening. Does he know? Did someone describe your face? Did a witness recognize your car? He stops, looks directly at you, sir. For a second time disappears. Did you happen to see anything unusual? You almost smile. You know exactly what happened. You were there. No. Your voice is calm. I just got here. The detective nods. Thanks. He turns around and keeps walking. You disappear into the crowd. 3 years later, that detective will discover he had just spoken to the killer. Why would anyone take that risk? Most people think they already know because killers enjoy reliving the crime. Because they're arrogant. Because they think they're smarter than the police. Those explanations sound satisfying. The problem is, they explain almost nothing. Because if you've just committed the worst mistake of your life, why would you voluntarily walk back toward the one place most likely to destroy it? Look again. This story isn't really about murder. It's about a question. Imagine sending a message to the wrong person. The instant you press send, your stomach drops. Not because the message can still be changed. It can't. But because one question immediately takes over your mind. Have they read it? You check your phone. Nothing. 2 minutes later, again, still nothing. The message hasn't changed. The phone hasn't changed. Only your mind has. Psychologists have spent decades studying something surprisingly powerful. The human brain tolerates many unpleasant emotions. Pain, fear, embarrassment. But uncertainty is different. Uncertainty refuses to sit quietly. It keeps asking questions again and again and again. Think about the last time someone said, "We need to talk." Not now, later. The rest of your day changes. You replay old conversations, you imagine new ones, you invent possibilities that don't exist. Your brain begins solving a problem without having enough information to solve it. Now imagine the unanswered question isn't about a relationship. Imagine it's this. Did anyone see me? Did they find the body? Did I leave fingerprints? Do the police already know my name? The crime may last only minutes. The uncertainty can last for years. You've just discovered the first illusion. You think offenders return because they missed the crime. Closer. Many return because they can't escape the question the crime created. Investigative psychologist David Cantor has argued for years that one of the biggest mistakes people make is believing violent offenders all think alike. They don't. Some vanish forever. Some obsess over newspaper headlines. Some follow every press conference. Some physically return to the scene. That's why experienced investigators don't ask, "Do killers come back?" They ask something much more revealing. What kind of offender would feel unable to stay away? Because behavior doesn't tell investigators what happened. It tells them what someone is struggling with. Imagine two people leaving the same building. One walks away without ever looking back. The other turns around every few steps. The movement looks almost identical. The psychology couldn't be more different. Crime scenes work exactly the same way. Returning isn't always confidence. Sometimes. It's confidence collapsing, because uncertainty has a strange effect on the human mind. The less information we have, the more desperately we search for anything that makes the future feel predictable. For some offenders, that search leads them back to the one place they should fear more than anywhere else. But uncertainty is only the surface, because investigators eventually realized they weren't just watching a person return to a street. They were watching someone desperately trying to reclaim something they had already lost. You've just discovered the first illusion. You think the unanswered question is pulling him back. It isn't. The unanswered question is only the doorway. The real reason is much stranger. Imagine spending 20 years building a company. Every employee answers to you. Every decision begins with your voice. Every problem ends with your decision. Then, one morning, someone walks in and takes it away. The building is still standing. The people are still there. Nothing has physically changed except one thing. You no longer control what happens inside. You tell yourself you're finished with it, but 2 days later, you drive past a week later, you drive past again, You aren't trying to get the company back. You just want to see it, to know what's happening without you. Crime scenes can create something surprisingly similar. For a brief moment, everything belongs to the offender. The time, the place, the victim, the decisions. Then the first patrol car arrives. Yellow tape stretches across the street. Detectives begin taking photographs. Evidence markers appear one by one, 1, 2, 3. Every small yellow marker tells the same story. Someone else is in control now. The crime no longer belongs to the person who committed it. It belongs to the investigation. You think offenders return to relive the murder. Closer. Many return because they're watching ownership disappear. Every photograph rewrites the story. Every fingerprint belongs to someone else's investigation. Every witness statement adds details they never expected. Imagine writing your autobiography, then discovering someone else has started writing the final chapters without asking you. That's what an investigation feels like to some offenders. The story is still being written, they just aren't writing it anymore. And that loss of control can become psychologically overwhelming. Think back to the detective. He walked right past the killer. He asked a simple question. Did you see anything? The answer was only one word. No. The detective continued searching. The killer continued watching. For a few seconds, both men were investigating the same crime. One was trying to solve it. The other was trying to discover how close the first man had come. The distance between them wasn't measured in feet. It was measured in knowledge. One knew who committed the murder. The other knew where the evidence was. Neither knew what the other knew. That's where uncertainty becomes dangerous. Psychologists sometimes describe the brain as a prediction machine. Every second, it tries to answer one question. What happens next? Most of the time, it's remarkably good at it. You catch a ball. You finish someone's sentence. You know where the next step is before your foot touches the ground. Your brain constantly predicts the future. Violent crime destroys that ability. Suddenly, the future becomes impossible to calculate. Every knock at the door, every phone call, every police siren, every headline, every stranger looking in your direction could mean nothing. Or everything. The brain hates living that way. It begins searching for certainty anywhere it can find it. Sometimes, that means returning to the scene. Sometimes, it means watching the evening news every night. Sometimes, it means driving past the street without ever getting out of the car. Different behavior, same question. How much do they know? You've just discovered the second illusion. You think offenders are returning to a place. Look again. They're returning to information. To certainty. To the illusion that one more look might finally quiet the questions inside their own mind. But investigators eventually noticed something that made even less sense. Some offenders never returned, not once. They never drove down the street again. They never read the newspapers. They never watched the evening news. They behaved as though the place had disappeared from the map. Why would two people react in completely opposite ways to exactly the same uncertainty? That question would change criminal psychology forever. You've just discovered the second illusion. You think every offender responds to uncertainty the same way. Look again. Imagine two people surviving the exact same plane crash. One spends the rest of his life terrified of flying, the other becomes a pilot. The same event. Two completely different responses. Trauma doesn't create one kind of mind. It reveals the one that was already there. Crime is often the same. One offender spends years watching every development. Another refuses to hear a single word about the investigation. One drives back to the street. The other takes a different route for the rest of his life. One searches for certainty by getting closer. The other searches for certainty by staying as far away as possible. Different behavior, the same invisible enemy, uncertainty. That's why experienced investigators are careful with simple explanations. People often ask, do killers always return? No. Others ask, if someone returns, does that mean they're guilty? Again, no. Curious neighbors return. Journalists return. Witnesses return. Family members return. Behavior is never enough. Real investigations are never built on a single strange action. They're built on patterns, DNA, fingerprints, phone records, surveillance footage, witness statements, behavior. One clue is rarely convincing. 20 clues pointing in the same direction. Begin telling a story. That's why behavioral evidence doesn't solve murders. It helps investigators ask better questions. Nothing more, nothing less. One of the clearest examples came from the man later known as the BTK killer. Years after several murders, letters began arriving. Not from detectives, from the killer himself. No one had asked him to write. No one expected him to. Yet he kept reaching back toward the investigation. Not always toward the streets where the murders happened, but toward the people trying to understand them. The investigation had become part of the crime. Every newspaper article, every TV interview, every public statement created another opportunity to stay connected. Eventually, that decision would help investigators identify him. Not because he returned to every crime scene, because he never truly left the investigation behind. You've just discovered the third illusion. You think a crime scene is a place? It isn't. Not for long. The yellow tape eventually comes down. The evidence is boxed and cataloged. The photographers leave. Traffic returns. Children ride bicycles down the same street. To everyone else, the place slowly becomes ordinary again. But for some offenders, the real crime scene has already moved. It now exists somewhere detectives can't photograph. Inside memory, inside imagination, inside every unanswered question that refuses to disappear. Think back to the beginning. The detective looked directly at the killer. Did you see anything? No. One word. Then both men walked away. The detective believed he had left the crime scene behind. The killer believed he had escaped it. In a way, both were wrong, because neither of them realized where the most important crime scene actually was. It wasn't behind the yellow tape. It wasn't the street. It wasn't the broken fence, or the footprint, or the evidence markers. It was inside the mind of the only person who couldn't stop returning. Maybe that's why this behavior fascinates investigators after all these years. Not because it makes offenders easier to catch. Often it doesn't. But because it reveals something profoundly uncomfortable about the human mind. When a question remains unanswered, our brains keep trying to finish the story. Most of the time, that simply means replaying an awkward conversation, or checking your phone one last time before bed, or wondering whether you remembered to lock the front door. For an offender, the unanswered question is infinitely larger. What do they know? How close are they? Is today the day everything ends? The investigation becomes impossible to leave behind. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. The mystery was never, why do killers return to the crime scene? The real question is, what happens when the crime scene never leaves them? Because streets don't haunt people, memories do. And for some offenders, those memories become the longest sentence they will ever serve.